Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5th taping of Oral History. And we are at the City Building, and this month we are going to talk about Potsdam. So on behalf of Susie Spittler and me, I'm Barbara Cecil. We're glad to have you all here today, and we're glad to start our panel discussion. And Mrs. Joyce Weichert will start for us. Joyce.
Thank you. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about Timmons's Barber Shop, one of the oldest barber shops there was in the state of Ohio. And back in 78 years ago, this was written several years ago, in 1902, James Henry Timmons migrated from Dublin, Iowa, with his first cousin Abe to go to West Mountain, and then he came to Potsdam, and he started the little barber shop, and it was in his sister's house for a short time until he rented a room, and from there he started his hair cutting business. And I remember going to the barber shop when it was like you saw it, and sitting on a box on that chair, and he cut my hair in bangs and all the way around. Then I'm going to go to tell you some of the things that were in Potsdam when I was there. We had a neighbor down the way at the West End that had a horse named, what was that name, Dwayne? Nellie. He had a cart, and he would go up and down the streets of Potsdam, and he'd haul the children all around. He had a wife, and her name was Corey, and they had a big front porch, and all the children gathered there many times throughout the week just to go over to Corey and his house to ride on in that pony cart. I remember going uptown with my mother to Bechtel's store, and there was the post office. And there you got Gem City ice cream, chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry. You came across to Basil's variety store where he had all the penny candy. And in the back, all the farmers brought their cream every evening or certain times in the week to the cream station. And then there was Pearl Wissinger, and I think she must have been the first Avon lady in the state of Ohio, because that was many, many years ago, and Mother would go up there and get a little bit of Avon, so we would go and see Pearl. Then there was Harry's restaurant, Harry Farling's restaurant, and he was well known for his good malts and his sandwiches, and I think Dwayne could tell you more about going in there because I didn't go in. So, and I think it was a loafing place for a lot of the men of Potsdam. You remember that, Winston?
Certainly did.
And then we go on farther, and at my time, what used to be when I grew up was a grocery store, and my dad worked there. He always said he worked there 6 days a week, 15 hours a day, and that's how he got money to buy our house that we built. But that was called, was that Sol North? Mm-hmm. Sol North Grocery Store. And then you go across the corner, and was the big place that's there now, our post office, but that was the first car sales, and they sold Fords at that time, Norris's, and that was before they moved into West Melton, and I suppose they started selling Oldsmobiles or something like that. And then it became many, many groceries and a restaurant. Frank Dirth was in that place, and others. And I didn't tell you, though, on the corner was Conrad's grocery store. And then they were noted for their seal test ice cream. You could go get all the Royals, chocolate Royal, strawberry Royal, and all that. So, but I lived the 7th house at the west end of Potsdam, but I never, even though nothing happened in Potsdam much to make my folks afraid of anything, I never was allowed to go any farther than Harris and Esther Shanks. I never went running uptown.
Afraid of the Weichert boys.
I guess. But anyway,
Good reason.
that was the way it was, so. One of the things that I remember growing up was the Farmers Institute. That was such a nice time when all the ladies baked their best things and they auctioned them off. And there was a lot of eating. And I remember it was at the schoolhouse and the Church of the Brethren. I remember them cooking the dinners and then there was the best cakes, pies, etc. And they sold them by auction, and they gave door prizes. And when Jesse and Ethel Kreider were going together and attended, they received a rolling pin. And the West Mountain School furnished the music, and the state of Ohio, the speaker. Now, I don't remember a lot about that, but I do remember going. And that schoolhouse, if it would have been one more year, I would have gone there for my first year of school, and I always wished that it would have continued one more year so I could have gone there. Dan Warner was a bachelor, and he married Lily Arnott, and they had a daughter, Ruth, and son, Kermit Bud Warner, who did custom work with his threshing machine, and he stored it in the big barn, which is across from our house, where his son Kermit lives, and Arthur Broomball followed him, and there was that's where they had help me out. Arthur Broomball had the sawmill there, didn't he? Right across there. Then I remember also uptown where I told you that Saul North's grocery was, and where later Wilbur Bride had his hardware store. There was a big outside row of steps that went up to the telephone office, and that was the first telephone office in Potsdam there. Now, I don't remember that, only the steps, and that's what they tell me, that's where the telephone office was. The Mills brothers sang and danced on a farm wagon in Potsdam when they were kids many years ago. They're old men now. Some of them might be gone. I don't know. But I've always thought the Mills brothers were so good. And I remember in the Second World War when we went down to Kentucky to see my brother who was stationed at Fort Thomas. That was what they were playing, all those Mills Brothers records, and they were such good singers. And I think they originated from Piqua, didn't they? I think I have a lot more. I could just ramble on, but I'll give them a chance now, and I'm going to let my husband, Dwayne Weicker, take over.
Thanks for inviting us here today from Potsdam. Potsdam's been special to me. I was born there in 1934. I lived at all four ends of Potsdam, a couple times at one end, maybe twice, but I was born at the north end, and then we moved to the south end, and then we moved to the east end, and that's where we lived beside Arthur Broomball's steam engines. And they also at one time had a sorghum mill back there, and of course now our church owns the woods behind that. And they had all these steam engines out there, so I was out there playing on those, and if Arthur would catch you, well, he would run you off. But I got into one of the toolboxes, and there was bumblebees in there, and I got stung 11 times up the arm. And of course, my arm was only about this long, about this, but then it became about this big around. But I went running home. I thought I was going to die. But that was one of the things that I remember in my early times about Potsdam. I do remember the free movies that they had then later on, once a week, when Potsdam was booming and we had a restaurant and had all the stores. They was a lot of, they had the creamery, and of course she said the hardware store later on, which Wilbur Bride had owned, which Wilbur Bride had a hardware store in West Mountain at one time, which is behind that restaurant down there, downtown now, that they just refurbished, they told, or cleaned up or whatever. but there was a building behind that which was also an automobile dealership at one time, but Wilbur had a hardware store in there too. And those are some of the things that was the early times in Potsdam. And then we moved from Potsdam to West Melton, and we lived the first house on this side of the tobacco warehouse. And I can remember those people, and this is now West Melton, so you're getting a little deal here, but bringing those big boxes of tobacco in there, but I'd go over there, and the guy that was running it, he didn't want me over there, so he'd say, well, you go around behind there, and there's a bunch of pennies back there. Of course, I would take off, but there was never no pennies back there. And I become to find out he not only chewed and smoked, but he lied. And then we moved from there out on Emmerich Road, and we lived there a few years. And then we moved back to Potsdam, to the north end of Potsdam, and that's where I lived until we bought an old barn at the south end of Potsdam. My dad bought a barn at the south end of Potsdam, and I had given him the money for the down payment. I was saving money. I was a frugal boy then, but now my wife spends it all. But anyways, we finished the upstairs in the barn, and we lived up there until things worked out. And then we would go. My brother and I would go downstairs on Monday morning, and you go down there to wash, and have to run the groundhogs out of the barn so you could wash. But we finally got the downstairs finished, and we finally had an old barn into a house. But that became popular in the latter days when people, the wealthy people, they would buy these barns, but they were nice, and they would just refinish them into houses. But anyways, we lived there and till I got married. And we got married in 1953. I was still in high school when we got married. And I told my wife, I said, I had 3 stepmothers. And I said, I'm either leaving the country or we're going to get married and I can be out on our own and get out of this. It wasn't very nice. Stepmothers liked their own children, but it didn't seem like they liked the children that was on the other side of the family. But anyways, that's not history of Potsdam, but that's history of people that lived in Potsdam. But anyways, we got married in 1953, and then things progressed in Potsdam. We watched the church. They bought the Ammons farm behind us, which was Charlie Ammons' farm, and at one time, and Charlie Ammons lived uptown next to the barber shop, him and Belle. And I never knew either one of those people, but they were, I guess, from what I understand, the upper class of Potsdam at that time. And they found Charlie Ammons dead one day out in the field behind Bud Warner, which somebody had mentioned his name earlier. The house that we lived in, or we live in now, sat over on Wright Road, and the man that owned it was going to burn it down. And he found out that there was 3 people that wanted it, Floyd Serber and Bud Warner and another man, and I didn't know who the other man was, but I knew Floyd Serber because that's who we bought it from. But anyways, he had bids on it, and they jacked the house up and just moved it through the field, set it on a foundation, and later on, as time went on, Joyce and I bought the farm there. There was 21 acres in the house, and I thought I was in a mansion. I thought it was really a nice house, going from a barn to a house, and since then we've lived there and we raised our family there. And back to these steam engines across the street, I can still see them cleats going down the road, bumping in the road. And but that's the way they done a lot of their farming. And of course, they steamed tobacco beds and a lot of other things. The steam engines run the sawmills and that was their power. And Potsdam has always kind of been a special place to me. And then later on, as we became a little more affluent. The Hellstrom Garage burnt down in Potsdam, and it left a vacant lot there. Raleigh Hellstrom had owned this garage, and his wife, Norma, is here today. As a matter of fact, she handed me this little note. And so it was up for sale. So people was telling me, kept telling me that Potsdam ought to get a place for the children to play uptown. But Bright's Farm Store, where it had sat, them buildings were gone, and that was a vacant lot. And somebody said, you know, they ought to get that lot there and make a playground for the people, which would have been nice, but that never happened. But anyways, my wife and I talked, and I said, well, we'll see what the property is going to sell for, and maybe we can buy the property, and we'll go from there. And she said, well, what are we going to do with it? And I said, well, we're not going to keep it, but maybe we can donate it to the village for a park. Well, to make a long story short, this happened. I had talked to Raleigh, and this Raleigh, we was at a meeting at the Salem Church. And as a matter of fact, Raleigh brought this situation up. He said, well, why don't you buy that lot off of me? And I said, well, maybe I will. But anyways, Raleigh became very ill and passed away. And now I had to deal with his wife. That was a different story. And but anyways, to make a long story short, we got the property bought, and we turned it over to the village. Well, there was a lot of chaos in Potsdam, and the council fought the deal. They just, well, a man come in to clean the cement up and get all the garage floor and everything out free. Well, a couple of the ladies of the council stopped him and told him to get off the property. Well, he had all this debris piled up, which he did. He left. And then the kids started playing on it, and I made a comment to somebody, they better get that off of there. Somebody's going to get hurt, and then there's going to be problems. But anyways, they finally got it. It cost them $3,000 then to get it hauled away. But anyways, they finally got it hauled away, and the park was developed. The village and other people donated, and they put a fence up, and they put a gazebo up, and they put swings up, a flagpole. Very nice, I think. Very nice park. But we go up there occasionally, and the children are playing and having a big. Is my time up? Okay, my time is up, but having a good time, and I was just glad that. The way I grew up, that I had an opportunity to help somebody else have a nice place to play, especially the children. And I praise God for all this. And now my time's up, and everybody's shaking their head, move on, so I'm going to turn it over to Jess Castle.
Thank you, Dwayne, and thanks for inviting me. As many of you know, I'm not a public speaker, so I'm going to read a lot of mine. And the cover letter that I got had 10 names listed. And I thought to myself, if they take those 10 names, I would be last. I wouldn't have anything to talk about. So mine's a lot on our personal experience in Potsdam. So this is October the 12th, and it's Memories of Potsdam. Mine is from 1920 to 2010. I came to Potsdam with my parents. They were good friends of Senator I.E. Baker, who lived back of the park that Dwayne's talking about. And so at that time, I met the Shanks and Mary Esther. Well, not in 1920, but later on, I should say. Then in the late 30s, when Milton Union schools merged, and a pretty young lady came from Potsdam to Milton to school. She was in the same class with my sister Norma, sitting back there. Of course, that was rather convenient. Her father was killed in an auto accident just north of Potsdam when she was 9 years old. Her mother passed away just 3 years later of pneumonia. Brother Harris and sister-in-law Esther, also of Potsdam, had married, and Mary Esther went to live with them until October 14th, 1944. And 2 weeks past her birthday was when I swiped her away, and 3 years later of courtship, it happened. And we were married on October the 14th, 1944. We moved to the farm to help my dad, a 114-acre farm down southwest of West Milton on Garland and Frederick Road. Norma lives just across from the farm still yet. After our honeymoon, the next encounter with Potsdam was after civilian public service, the alternative to the war service, better known as CPS. Mary left the farm and came back to Potsdam while I was in the service to live with her brother and wife Esther in Potsdam. Our daughter Sonia was born while I was in CPS, months prior to my discharge from CPS. We moved to Liney Hoke's upstairs apartment here in Potsdam. No running water, outside toilet, but Liney could sure make good shoe-fly pie. She would bring it up the steps to us. It was really good. I worked in Cliff Hanson's body shop downtown Potsdam on the northwest corner, which eventually Raleigh got that particular property. Mary Esther and I moved back to the farm to help Dad and Mom. That was the time here in Potsdam was just a holdover till I could get back to the farm and help Dad. After moving out of state in 1949 to Leitersford, Indiana, and then back to Troy in 1950, and 2 more kiddos, Mary and I moved back to Potsdam New Year's Day in 1952 to Mary's Aunt Edna's bath and bedroom upstairs, living room and kitchen downstairs, and had a nice big garden. In July 1952, Mary Esther and I purchased the Potsdam 3-room school from Kenny and Mary Carroll. We moved in with 3 children in July 1952 at a purchase price of $7,000. It was a wonderful place to raise our family. 1 acre and a half of ground. 1 room of the 3 rooms had a basketball goal, and the kids roller skated. And 1 room had a 3-car garage. The dwelling part was the south room, 6 rooms and bath. It was very nice, and we enjoyed it a lot. We had church parties, town parties, and I spent $4,000 improvements on the schoolhouse. We traded it to Lowell Coat Realty of West Milton for $11,000. So I broke even and lived there 15 years. So it was a good experience. Let's see. We put a fireplace in it, hot water heat, a big picture window, overhead garage door, new entrance to the kitchen from the west drive. Dad and I tore off the belfry. I went on town council for 15 years that we lived here. I was mayor 3 years and clerk 3 years. I was mayor in between the clerk and being on council. The clerk made $75 a year. The mayor made $50 a year. So I resigned the mayor's job and took the clerk's job. At that time, the clerk was illegally swearing in the guys on council. So I went to the county and got the proper papers that I could sign their bonds. And so that was a little side note. Our main reason to leave Potsdam was that Mary had made 6 trips to West Milton in one day. One of the trips, she had a bad accident. It was a Mercury station wagon. I was hauling riders to National Cash Register, and a fellow pulled out in front of Mary when she was about 2 car lengths from him, and she couldn't avoid him. And Raleigh took this car, this Mercury, cut the front end of it. We found a car just like it in Dayton that had a paper drive and it burned out inside. The only part of the front that was damaged was 2 burnt places on the cowling up in front. Raleigh welded those 3 plates on each frame. I drove it another $7,000, 7,000 miles, and sold it for $7,000. So he did a beautiful job. So after Mary had made those 6 trips, we kind of decided it was about time to join him in West Milton. Sonia had already gone to college, and Ed was just about ready to go. So I lost my buddy to mow yard, because he was doing a lot of the yard mowing, and while I was hauling, I hauled 7 other people to NCR for 16 years. The first time we moved back to the farm, I drove a school bus for about 4 or 5 years, something like that. And I hauled the kids from Potsdam. My route came out around and picked the kids up in Potsdam. That was a good experience. So I think my time probably about up too, I expect. So it's been a pleasure, and it's good to see everybody, and good old Potsdam. It'll have a warm place for me too. Oh, this is Miriam Miller, not, who did I say? I thought you. Strasser. No, that's her sister.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. And Potsdam was my hometown because I was born and raised on a farm just miles south of Potsdam. And our neighbors was Thea and Nori Swank and Emerson Swank and Jesse Kreider. And myself and all my siblings, except Neva Jean, my youngest sister, was delivered by Dr. Schellebarger from Potsdam. He was the only doctor in town that I remember and the doctors didn't have office hours like they do now and make an appointment. They came to the house, and we were all delivered at home. And there was no paved roads in Potsdam or any place around. And my dad was working on Miami County, for Miami County, and he scraped roads. And some of you maybe Winston rode the road grader, but you could walk faster than the road scraper would do. He'd go up one side and scrape it to the middle, and down the other side and scrape it to the middle, and then go down the center and level it off. And Potsdam was a very booming town at one time. It wasn't always Potsdam. It was Georgetown, and then New Lebanon, and then Potsdam. And I think the reason that they changed it from New Lebanon because there was another New Lebanon, and it would always get the mail mixed up. And then we had I had 3 churches and groceries and school and barbershop, Bright's Hardware, and with a miscellaneous store in it. and that's where we bought our first television in 1949, and that was a great thing. And Basil Carroll's is where we took our cream and eggs up and sold them. I don't know what he done with them or where he sold them, but his store was just like a big long closet. It was just narrow and as long as the alley was, and it was just full of stuff. And if you'd ask him where something was, he knew exactly where it was. You couldn't find it, but he knew where it was. And with the 3 churches in Potsdam, all of them were full at that time. They had full attendance, and we went to the United Brethren Church, which became Evangelical United Brethren Church, and now today United Methodist. And our family, when we was baptized, they didn't have a baptismal, basin or anything. We was baptized in Cleve Clippinger's Creek. And we'd all go down there, and we'd take a blanket or something along for when we got out of the creek after being baptized, and wrap up, and then we'd go home. And Bertha Schaefer, she lived, and that was Jess Schaefer's wife. She would always go around to all the auctions and get antiques. She liked antiques, and so she bought so many antiques. And then Jess Schaefer and Orrin Schaefer were the cattlemen around. And they would haul the cattle to market for the farmers. And Orrin and Velma Schaefer, they had a peacock, and they lived just through the field from Mother and Daddy and where I grew up. And it would holler out in the evening, "Help, help!" And all of us, we would remark about, well, Velma's calling for help again. That maybe Orrin's after, and she's hollering for help. But where the post office is now, I think Frank Durst had it at one time, and then Wackler's had it, and then Florence's bought it later on. And Florence's lived in the south end of the grocery. And then too, with Wackler's, when they had it, they had a room off to the west, and they had like a house there, like a living room and a kitchen and like that. But they had like a bar right out in the store for meals. And, restaurants wasn't heard of in those days. People just didn't go to restaurants, they ate at home. But a lot of them, Korvaldik, I can remember him coming in, and one time he wanted milk soup. He wanted some slices of bread and a glass, and then he creamed up the bread and put in the glass and put some sugar on it and milk, and he had milk soup. And then one time he had a big wooden box on the front of his car and had ice in it and peddled fresh fish. I don't know where he got them, but
Come on the railroad.
oh, okay. But he would, peddle fish around. And the one time, there was like parking in front of the store. And one time, Kate Wackler, for a joke, they was always playing jokes on him. And she went out and took the box of fish off of his car. And so when he went out, he didn't realize, so he went around the town where he was going to sell fish, and there was no fish. And he come back and he said, he couldn't find his fish. Well, there was, you know. And so I'm going to talk about going to school. The school was a 3-room schoolhouse, and I went to school 4 years there when they consolidated the schools, and I had to come into Milton. But that was so nice. The teachers was almost like another mother. Miss Kuntz was my first grade teacher there, and also my second grade teacher. And the room was divided off. The first grade sat on one side, the second grade sat on the other side. And when she was teaching the first grade, the second grade was studying, and the same way with the second grade. And then going back the hallway was the third and fourth grade, and that was the same way. And I had Miss Black and Miss Rohr as my third and fourth grade teachers. And the classes wasn't very big. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 14 in the first and second grade in that class. And this one is got some of the older kids in it, but I think I counted 23. So you can know how big the school was. But we played Red Rover, let whoever come over, crack the whip, and we took our skates to school that we could skate on the sidewalk, you know, at recess. A lot of us didn't have any sidewalk or any place to skate. And the second room down the hall was the third and fourth grade. And in that room was a big stove or a big boiler, or it was wood and coal. And the coal shed was outside, and Jack Johnson, he was custodian. And he lived right next door to the school. And I think that's where Niswangers live now. And he would go over every morning, get up early and go over every morning, and make sure that it was warm when the kids got there. And there was the woodshed was back of the school, just like a small outbuilding. And then in the other big room in front was the higher grades, and Mr. Moat taught those grades. And my sister Helen, she was in Mr. Moat's class, and one time she was talking, and he had told her to quit talking, and she didn't listen. And so he threw a chalkboard eraser and hit her on the head. And, you know, today that wouldn't be allowed. But Joyce, she mentioned about the Farmers Institute, and that was always a great big affair. And then we, in May, we had May Day, and we'd wind the maypole. We had to practice winding the maypole a week or two before, in and out, in and under, and that was a big afternoon. And that's when I got to take my long underwear, my long brown stockings off. I got to take my long underwear off a little before that. And everybody, all the girls, we wore dresses and long underwear and the long brown stockings. And I got to take my long brown stockings off and put anklets on the 1st of May. And in the pictures here, you can see that the girls had long brown stockings on. And so that was a big affair. And And then too, Dwayne said about the movies in the summertime. They stretched a great big cloth or something across from the garage to Bright, the one where it was Bright's store, and we'd sat on the street and even eat, maybe bring our own popcorn or get a candy bar or an ice cream cone, and they were only a nickel then. And Beck's, which we called Bechtel's Beck's, a great big cone, 2 great big dips. We could have, double flavors or, one of each flavor or anything like that. And going back to school, we just had to, do our own entertainment. And sometimes the boys played baseball out at the side in the vacant lot. And we went to school every day, rain or snow, sleet or whatever, hot. They didn't dismiss anything, and air conditioning was not heard of in those days. So we went regardless of weather. And then Belle Dittmer, she lived beside the barber shop, and sometimes we'd go up at recess or at our lunchtime, and when we'd go by her house, well, she'd always come out and talk to us, and she had so many pretty flowers, and she would always come out, and sometimes she'd pick flowers or cut a great big bouquet to take back to school. And I thought at that time she was an old lady, but I don't think maybe she was as old as what I thought. But being a kid, 40 then was ancient. But, and 2 women didn't work at that time. And Belle Dittmer was the Ammons' boy's sister, wasn't she? So, and then 2, they told about how Burgess Aldick, he would, in the wintertime, he would go real fast and turn donuts in the middle of Potsdam in the square. And I don't think there was any stop signs at that time. And or no street names that I can ever remember. And but that there was always, fun things for kids to watch and to stay back, not to get hit. And then too, we would go to the north on Sunday afternoons in the wintertime when it was snow, and I think it snowed deeper then and more snow. It would come in like in November and last till February, and we would go to the north end of town at, I think, Schaefer's Hill.
Yes.
Schaefer's Hill, and sled. And Swanks, they had a sleigh and a pony, and they would bring the sleigh up to the north end of town, and we would all pile in and sled down or go down the hill in that sleigh, and then the pony would bring it back up, and then we'd pack in it again and go. But we had to watch going on sleds because there was a creek, and if we went too far, we'd go in the creek. So that there's a lot of my personal memories. And at 4th of July, Mrs. Schroyer, Teeny Schroyer's mother, she sold fireworks at her house. She would go someplace and get fireworks and sell them. And then, too, my sister wanted me to mention that she has a wall hanging that has Ferris Foreman's advertisement on it. Said it's got a little pin cushion.
Yeah, I got one of those.
Oh, well, little pin cushion and some places to put thread. But she's got it hanging on her wall. So.
Yeah, Aunt Fanny and Uncle Ferris are my aunt and uncle.
Oh, well, okay. But she said if I wanted to come out and get it, but I didn't want to go out into, if it would get damaged or something, I wouldn't want that. So, but that's some of my memories. So I'll turn it over to Louise Fisher.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I lived 2 or 3 different places in Potsdam, and then I grew up a mile from Potsdam. And in '52, we bought a lot and we built in Potsdam, and I've been there ever since. When we were building, my husband was having problems with the jack rafters, getting them lined up. My dad says, well, why don't you go see Herm Olinger? He can help you out with it. So he went up and talked to Herm and told him what he needed. And Herm said, well, where do you live at? He told him down in the east end of Potsdam. And he said, oh, you mean down there in Needmore? And Doyle says, well, what do you mean Needmore? He says, it needs more of everything. Because there were very few houses down there at that time, and it has built up quite a bit since that. And also, I've spent quite a while around Potsdam as well. And then in '76, in the village history of Potsdam, they had a bicentennial. And there's a lot, it gives all the businesses in there, and we had an undertaker, and I don't know what all we didn't have in Potsdam. The list is too long to read. But what I would like to read out of this for you is written by Paul Oda. I'm sure a lot of you in here knew Paul, and he lived within a mile of Potsdam and grew up. And it's just entitled Potsdam, Ohio. Rain-laden clouds bend low today, they veil the silver sky, where shines the sun in consistency obscured to human eye. In pensive mood, I wander back to days that now are gone, to seams deep etched on memory's page by many a vivid tone. The 3-room schoolhouse lingering stands, a resident now it is, where many a youth and maiden spent long hours on short devis. Recall the print-dressed, blushing girls, the awkward, timid boys. Dad called it puppy love back then. We hadn't outgrown our toys. There was a gong on the principal's door from which a sash cord hung, where rushing feet went rushing the moment it was rung. I see the old schoolmaster yet, his kind mustached face. His voice he raises in morning song, mine eyes have seen thy grace. For naughty boys the chalk would fly from his hasty hand, and for meek, mischievous ones, his gentle reprimand. I live again the zero spell of winter '36. Chris Harmon then was janitor, and he the fires would fix. The fun we had at recess time, too lengthy to recall, from shooting darts and black man to Andy over and baseball. At Christmas time, the trees were decked and share our presents small. A party at Thanksgiving time, on Valentine's, a ball. School cleanup day came in the spring. On St. Patrick's Day, I think, where each would bring a rake or broom to brighten up the clink. Jack Johnson lived next door to school, and there was quite a fuss. On butchering day, the cracklins, old Jack would share with us. There was a day in '35, Thanksgiving, I believe. They said the schoolhouse was condemned. consolidation squeeze. But then they patched things up a while, perhaps a year or so, till a new schoolhouse could be built a couple of miles below. Folks then were happy. Times were tough, impossible it seems. Bread was a nickel, eggs a dime, and butter was 18. Do you recall the midweek show and the country's interest in it? They hand a sheet on Shank's old store, and after dark begin it. The medicine show, the old goat man, and the bike performers each played his part in Potsdam's life and made our kinship warmer. There was the Farmers Institute with activities in abundance. They'd lease the kids from school one day to bolster the attendance. The church in this little town is then our three in number: the Mennonite, the EUB, and mine, the Kirkterblunder. The EUB is much the same, or was the last I was in it. The other two have been revamped and changed from where I seen it. Their doors are open still to all, alike to saint and sinner. The message wide proclaiming yet for gray-haired and beginners. Remember how at Halloween the mayor's form was hung in effigy above the square, a bit of devilish fun. The livery barn that then still stood there in the auction sale, where stuff was brought from near and far, from scythe to milking pail. Till late at Weezer blacksmith shop stood 1/2 block northeast, with blazing torch and horseshoe nail, he shod the sweating beast. Remember when Saul's grocery store was just a village green, then was the post office for a while, then Lauren sold Ford machines. The other corner, now burned down, was then collecting cream. The oldsters round would come and share adventures, milk, and means. Old Cow would tell of angry bulls, and Orrin would sit and laugh, while Babe would blast old FDR. That was before the draft. Then there was Osa and his dog. He ran the small bike shop. The boys on Sunday afternoon would make this place their stop. Then let's remember Elger, too, the simple, loving lad who was a man but never grew up. My, all the fun he had of being mayor, and selling cars and getting things for Harry. The things he made in Jack's old shop would fill a commentary. B. Carroll ran a little store with many notions in it. He bought cream too, as I recall, after others quit it. Here Harry Timmons settled down and many a two-bit made. His boys still run the barber shop with clippers, strap, and blade. I think that pretty well sums up, and I think that's all with what the rest of them have added, and I'll turn it over to Whitson Kleppinger.
I want to thank you for being here today, and I could tell you I could play off of what these other folks have said here for the whole rest of the afternoon if I wanted to, but I know no one wants to sit here and hear that. But so many of these things that they have mentioned are just, I can remember. I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I can remember some of the things that they're relating to us today, especially what Miriam has said about the school. Of course, Miriam's older than I am, so she remembers things a little differently than I do. But I remember the old school and how the grades shared a classroom. Grades 3, 4, and 5 sat all in the same room, and if you were in 3, you recited while 4 and 5 studied and so on. And Evelyn Rohr was our teacher, and I guess I had a crush on her. I thought she was the prettiest girl I ever saw, but I've thought that about a lot of other girls since, so maybe it's just 'cause I was a young fella. Jesse, like he said, he was our school bus driver, and you know something, if I recall, you put Bob Hyman and I off the bus one year, and we never did get back on. So we'll still have to get you for that. And Dwayne and his brothers, that was a crew right there. When I worked up there on the farm, what we always referred to as the Ammon farm, and the boys would come out there, and one day I was disking ground there, and I looked back, and there was one of those guys walking right between my double discs. And I thought, oh my goodness, I jumped off that tractor. Was it you? Or do you remember? Whoever it was, I run him clear back into Potsdam. I was aggravated.
Everybody run me back.
Yeah. You was the meanest of the lot, I think. And Joyce, I, of course, remember where she lived there, but like she said, her folks wouldn't let her come uptown. But especially I remember that old schoolhouse. I was only there about a year and a half because I was born in Dayton out in the Belmont section in 1930, right during the Depression. And I always thought they meant something different about the Depression, but my parents were depressed because I was born at that time, I think. So I put a little bit different light on it. But nevertheless, I came to Potsdam area in about 1937. I used to visit with my grandparents a few years before that, and I'd always get in trouble out there. My grandpa, Elmer Kunkelman, a lot of you people remember him of our generation anyhow, and Grandpa come out there one time and he caught me. I had my dog, and I thought my dog would look better if he had a bobbed off tail, and I was going to try to get him in the vise and sort of amputate that tail. And when my grandfather caught me at that, why, I caught heck. I mean, he give me heck, and with the temper I had, I threw a horseshoe at my grandpa and hit him in the head. And then my mother practically beat me to death because she was so mad at me. But it all worked out. We all made up. But I do remember one thing about the old schoolhouse. The brick walls were so thick, about 3 bricks wide. I think this was the way they built and for the sound and everything like that. But where the walls were, there were 2 doors, one on either edge of that brick wall. Well, Mr. Moat, who had the older classes and had a little trouble with some of them boys over there, he would stand them in between those doors and shut those doors on them, and it was like solitary confinement. And I don't know how long he made them stand there, but I'll bet they was sorry for what they had done. Anyhow, that was his punishment. But like has been mentioned here, a lot of the things that I remember, were the grocery stores, and they changed hands many times, and the ice cream that's been mentioned and things like that. And those ice cream cones was a nickel then. Yes. When, like Miriam said, you could get a great big ice cream cone, but it only cost you a nickel. But candy bars also. I had a couple of blacksmith shops. I think Sam Breidenbaugh had one, along with Ad Weezer. And this was interesting to watch those guys work on their forge and things like that. I remember the sawmill that Dwayne alluded to down there that was run by the big steam engine, and all us young boys was interested in the steam engines. They also had the cane mill, was run by a steam engine out on Allball Road, and that had a huge steam engine there to provide that steam to make the processing of the syrup and everything. And that thing sat there for so many years, it sunk down in the ground about 1.5 feet, I think, and I don't know how they ever got it out of there when it was moved. But I do remember all those old buildings, the restaurant that was uptown there, and somebody, I think maybe Joyce mentioned Pearl, being there and living in there and selling.
About the Potsdam slops that we had at Harry Farley.
Exactly. Yeah, we had those, and had that little ice house set right side of the restaurant there, and we would go in and buy a whole carton of Coke and then we would steal ice out of Harry's ice house to cool down our Coke, you know. And so it come in handy in more ways than one. But I can remember the old sail barn down by where your parsonage was built, the older parsonage was built down there. I remember that. And I believe the barber shop was the first licensed one in the state of Ohio, if I'm not, if I'm correct about that. And Henry, and like I said, Henry and his boys run that. I think all the boys cut hair at one time because there used to be several chairs in there, but they always, up until almost the end, had that old copper boiler set there and heated the water, which Elgar would usually bring in, and fill the container with water, and then they'd heat that for shaving, and that thing sat there for just about as long as I can remember, although they finally did get an electric water heater, I think. Of course, the churches, which played such a tremendous part in the whole life of Potsdam, all three churches and later four, as the schoolhouse was sort of converted over and used as a church also. And I had the privilege of working on all these churches back in, I think, 1958, when we put the addition on the missionary church back on the south end, and that was extended. I worked on your Brethren Church over there after your fire. What year was the fire?
74.
74. And we had to redo the basement. And I'll tell you all, if you don't know, they were very happy that they still had a church. Because I think another 15 or 20 minutes, and it would have been gone, because the flames that started in the basement was coming up right through the side walls, and it was smoked up the sanctuary, and if the fire departments from Lara and Potsdam was not too much of a fire department, but I think West Milton, and they all came out and saved the church, but the basement and some other part did have to be remodeled. Of course, I was a member of the church, and as Miriam had mentioned, it was started out as the Brethren in Christ. I think that's what our state charter is with. Became the United Brethren, became the Evangelical United Brethren, and then the United Methodist. And I've been a member of that church. As a matter of fact, probably the oldest living member there now, which because I joined there in 1938. And but I was also allowed to contract the job of remodeling our sanctuary there. We completely turned the sanctuary around and put the lectern and everything up at the south end and closed up the big stained glass window at that end of the church. And that was that way for about 4 years. And then in 1978, we put on the other addition, the fellowship hall and the new kitchen and restrooms and all that stuff. So I was really, I'm proud that I had a part in doing that, something I will always be able to remember. I wanted to say something to you that maybe the others haven't touched on quite so much because it affected me so much, I guess, and that is some of the surrounding areas, because the farmers in the community, and Miriam said a little bit about that. She lived a mile east or south of town there and lived on a farm. But the people in this farming community was also a part of Potsdam. I think just as the way thousands of communities have been over this great country of ours, that you see these little towns on the map, and you don't think too much about the surrounding areas. But believe me, that is what kept a lot of these little towns together. And I think Potsdam is that same way. And I can, my father, and it was Cleve Kleppinger, and Howard Allball farmed together what we called the Ammon farm, because it belonged to the Ammons, and Belle Dipner, also a sister of that family, and her son Merlin Dipner, I believe, he was taking charge of that farm at the time because Bill was getting quite elderly. Anyhow, Dad and Howard farmed that farm together. And in about 1943, my dad became seriously ill and had a couple of operations, and he just wasn't able to do his farming. And I don't know whether it was the first time it happened in the community, but it was, of course, more noticeable and more touching to us and more appreciated by us because all these farmers, these neighbors came in and plowed that whole farm up for him, and they worked that ground down and got that all ready for planting. Now, I don't remember if they planted it or not, but these are just a few of the names that I'd like to read to you. These guys, as I can remember them, coming down through those fields on the tractor, and I still have movies, and they are excellent movies, although they were taken in 1939 by my Uncle Mern. He came out there and watched these guys plow this ground up and work it and everything. But the guys I could remember on their tractors was Leonard Albaugh, Howard Albaugh, Emerson Swank, Lester Hall, Ralph Schaefer, Bob Honeyman Sr., Arthur Odie, Herbert Donner, Riley Strasser, Herb Strasser, Bob Kleppinger, Aubrey Yance, and Harvey Fetters. And there may have been others, and I apologize to them, but these men are all deceased now. Every one of them, I think, are deceased now. But they came in and did all this for my father, and it meant so much to our family. He was appreciated, our whole family was appreciative that was taken care of. That way, we just lived on a small farm out there, just east of town, right across from Hyman's dairy farm, and my brother and I, Bob and I, we worked for a lot of the farmers in the neighborhood around there because our farm didn't really need all of us, you might say. My dad and my brother and myself, I was just kind of the runt of the litter at that time, and couldn't do too much, but I did participate. And we went around and we helped neighborhood farmers to take in hay and bale hay and go on the threshing rings and the corn shucking rings, which was quite an event, mostly because of the great big meals that was served at those events. So we had got a lot of enjoyment out of that, and we was able to one year raise a nice cob of tobacco for Arthur Odie because I believe Paul was in service that year. I don't know, did you guys go together or anything?
No, Carol Heck and I went together.
Yeah, but it was about that same time. It was during World War II, and anyhow, we put out Arthur's crop of tobacco that year because he didn't have enough help. So, that's just some of the things that I remember. But that farm there, I don't know how many years my dad and Howard farmed that together, but it was many, many years, and I put in many, many hours out there on the tractor working that farm down. And one thing, it's like I said, I can't remember everything about it, but one thing is always amazing to me was how the lane went through the farm, and you had to come in behind the Methodist church there, and the lane went to the south, and then east, and then south again, and then east again, and then south again, and then east again, and then south again, and then east again. And I'm not kidding you a bit. It made every one of those 90-degree turns, and you could drive clear back through there, and when you reached the other end, you was behind Leonard Albaugh's property over on the Albaugh Road. And we drove through that thing all the time, And when we raised tobacco there was a tobacco shed right up behind the house that sits between your church, the Brethren Church, and the Missionary Church. Do you remember that barn set back there? We hung tobacco in that barn.
That's our fellowship hall.
No, that's the same building? The same building, is it?
Yeah.
I see. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. We hung tobacco in that for many years, along with the barn that set back where the regular buildings of the house was. Of course, those buildings are all gone now, so the landscape's a little different. Of course, Jessica Kreider owned that farm. It was 177 acres, a big farm, and we had primitive equipment, to say the least. Then 32 acres, I believe, was sold off to the Brethren Church, and that starts right along the south line of the Methodist parking lot and goes back and, of course, takes in the park and the ball field down there, which has been furnished for the community. And that, you have to realize what an asset that has been, or at least I feel that has been a tremendous asset. Well, there's just been so many things mentioned, you know. I had not lived there too awful long, too many years. I left that community probably shortly after I was married in 1953, and lived for a while down on the Emmerich Road. And although I'd moved around several times, as a matter of fact, about 5 different times, I think, I always stayed within Union Township. One of the things that always stuck in my mind is when we was farming the almond farm, and it's related in this thing that part of the history here that Louise read to you, and that was Roy Ammons' death. He went back in that field around this zigzag lane that I was referring to you about, and it seemed as though he had these weed cutters, and he'd cut a little area there and apparently fell over dead right in this area that he had cleared out. Well, I was about 12 or 13 years old at that time, and my parents and the Allballs were very close friends, so Leonard Allball had said I could take one of his registered Guernsey cattle to the fair for my 4-H project. And I had this cow out leading her back along this lane, kind of in preparation for the Miami County Fair. Well, I got within about 50 yards of where Roy Ammons' car was sitting up there, and the old heifer bolted. She decided to go back to the barn, and I naturally ran after her. But apparently, Roy was lying there dead at that time, and he lay there for 5 days in the hot July sun. And when my mother and dad found him on a Sunday night, it was a very gruesome and smelly experience. I can remember my mother relating that to me, and it was that was an event that a lot of people around Potsdam remembered about that. Up at the other end of town, outside of town, was also mentioned by someone about the sledding, Miriam. I think maybe you mentioned that, over there on Ed Mattis's hill, because it was a fun hill. You'd come down about so far, and then it had a bump in it, and you'd pile them about 3 or 4 high on a sled and go down there, and whoever was bottom man on the sled got the impact as you went over the bump, and it was a good time. And on the other side of the 721 was a nice pasture-like field that belonged to Orrin, and we decided we'd make a ball field in there with his permission, and we rounded up an old road grader from somewhere, I have no idea where, but we scraped all this infield out and made a very nice ball field out there. Nice outfield and everything, with one exception. Right out in the main part of left field was a humongous rock. Great big thing that we could not do a thing with it. Well, fortunately for us, about that time they were putting that big 16-inch oil line in clear from Texas that ran up to Lima, and it's right on the west side of that farm. And they was trenching that, you know, for this oil line, and welding the pipes together and lowering it down in there and backfilling it with a bulldozer. Well, we got up the courage to go and talk with this operator of this bulldozer, and of course it was a company machine, I imagine, but he brought his machine over there, pushed the rock out and pushed it clear down to the creek, and backfilled the hole, and we had a real nice ball field when that was all done, and we had a lot of fun up there, and a lot of guys come out there and played ball, especially on Sunday afternoon, and that's just the way things went, I think, around a small town. And I know, as sure as I'm sitting here, if Paul Odie would not have died just how long, a couple of months ago, he would have been here today. And when she read that brought back so many memories to me about Paul Odie. Because Paul Odie, I swear, saved my life at one time. The creek come up real high, and us kids was playing down there like a bunch of idiots, like we always did. And I got upstream on that thing and got sucked down under a log by the high current. And Paul crawled out there on this log and reached down there and grabbed me by the arm and pulled me up. And I believe if he wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have been here talking to you today.
Well, you guys dove off of that bridge up there.
Oh yeah, we drove off the top of the old bridge when it had the iron banisters.
When they had the floods, and I said one of you guys were going to get dunked down there, and he'd laugh at me as a little boy, you know, and then right up you went again.
We had a lot of fun down around that creek. We used to carve the girls' names in the trees and all that stuff, but that grew over, so that disappeared. And the bridge, they took the bridge out, and we used to take toilet paper and roll it up real gently, you know, and tie it across the bridge, never thinking that somebody coming down through there might think it was rope. We want them to think it was rope, and they'd come down through there and they'd slide their wheels, you know, and we'd lay up there on the top of the bridge and just laugh and laugh, you know, and just, that's the reason your mother wouldn't let you out of the house. Those boys were always thinking.
You know, our church, though, for years and years enjoyed Orange Schaefer's, where you're talking about the ball. We had picnics every year down there.
Well, we swam back there all the
Yeah.
time, too, you know. That was a wonderful swimming hole
That was
back
Buddhist
there.
camp then.
It was our
we
time
swam back
about
Oh, yeah,
up.
yeah.
Barbara,
And,
Barbara, is our time up? I got a couple more things I want to
ahead.
say after you're done.
Go ahead.
well, I'm basically done. We also had a nice swimming hole down there on the creek that went through our pasture field and back onto Webb Crest.
Yep.
And a lot of the kids would come out from Potsdam, and they'd park their bikes up there by our barn and start running for the swimming hole down there. And Jeannie there maybe can remember that. That was her grandpa. Webb Crest was
Yep.
her grandpa.
Yep.
And the kids from Potsdam would come out there, and they'd throw down their bikes, and everybody'd start running for the swimming hole down there, and nobody, by the time you got down there, you was ready to dive in. And we made a point of doing that every year before Easter. And Easter comes in March sometimes, and there might almost be some ice on the edge of the pool, but we'd get in. We'd make it sure we'd get in by Easter time. That was one of our goals. Not too lofty a one, but it was a goal.
Lenny, we were married April the 19th, and it snowed all day long up to a little bit before the church wedding was, and there's snow all over ours. And then when we got done with the reception, it was so bad we could hardly leave Potsdam. Now, that was April the 19th. But getting back to Timmy's barber shop, he was a fellow only about 5 foot tall, and his boys all were 6 foot plus. His wife was that tall. But Mrs. Timmons had like a dry cleaning place in her house. She took a toothbrush and went over a suit, the whole complete suit, and dry cleaned it with a toothbrush. And also the barber shop was a place where you could take a hot bath. And I don't know what they charged for it. I know that he charged, during World War I, he raised his haircuts to a quarter. So I don't know what he charged for the, but then another thing, my grandpa, Henry Myers, went in there and had a tooth pulled. So they were also dentists. And I wanted to tell you that when we got married, Iona Carroll, who was Basil's wife, lived right next door to what is the Weicker Park now. She made my wedding dress, which was an all satin, and then not satin, but, well, it doesn't matter, but anyway, a lace that had all these buttons that she covered and everything down the sleeves and all, $15. And she made me 3 going-away suits for $3. Then I wanted to tell you that I wanted Dwayne to tell about Sam Hall and the Gypsies. When did you
The
tell him?
gypsies used to come through Potsdam, and they had this special liniment that they would rub on you for rheumatism. Well, they was going north, and they stopped at Sam Hall's, and he lived at the top of the hill there north of Potsdam, just after you crossed the creek, which Winnie was talking about, where we had the ballpark. And this lady told Sam this liniment, after she talked to him and he told her all about his rheumatism, that if she would rub him down with this liniment for a few cents, that he wouldn't have no rheumatism. And so she agreed, or he agreed with her, and he let her rub him down good with the liniment and everything, and then the gypsies, of course, they moved on to the next post. Well, anyways, Sam, a little later on in the evening, went to go to Potsdam or someplace, but Sam had $750 in his jacket or whatever coat he had, but the $750 was gone. But I think he still had the rheumatism. And it was a story. It's true. I mean, it happened. This lady's looking at me like, but it was some of the interesting things that happened around. So we had crooks back then, and we got crooks today.
And all of you know, I.E. Baker was our senator for years, and he was the mayor here in Potsdam for a good many years and started the Laura Gravel and Stone. And he lived this house right next door to the park too. And he never forgot Potsdam because he gave a lot of money to our church in different places all the years that he lived. And his family always came to communion, and we had breakfast and everything, and they always had that. And then one more thing I wanted to tell you. How many of you have heard about Gass's liniment that was invented by Potsdam here? And I was trying to find it in my book, but it healed everything. Even healed Sweeney in cows. And the whole write-up was about how this Gass's liniment was sold and did everything to heal the body and do that with cows and stuff, but nobody ever knew really what Sweeney meant. So, and then I wrote down a few more things here. There were 3 large strawberry growers here in town, Noah Shank, Calvin Minnick, and Jack Johnson. They hired a lot of people to come in and pick, and they had a real business with strawberries. You mentioned the cane molasses mill, didn't you? And then Orrin and Jesse Schaefer, of course, were always noted for their cattle, and during the Dayton flood, they were even, going down by foot to Dayton with their cows, and Orrin always liked to tell the stories about how that flood was. And then I wanted to tell you last that my mother was baptized in one of these creeks, but it was the dead of winter, and they broke the ice, and she never got sick. And that was what happened a lot of times if they baptized in the wintertime. They would just break the ice. Norma probably knows that. And not a one of the people ever got sick by being baptized down 3 times in that ice water. I told you about Mrs. Timmons and the dry cleaning. Okay.
You talked about the farmers going in.
When I first started working on the election over 40 years ago, we met in that little side room of Wilbur Bright's hardware store. It would have been somebody else then, I think. And from there, we moved to the township house and did all that election in that little place all those years before we moved down to there. And
One
guess
thing you
it-
didn't mention, Joyce, is the chief of police you had here.
oh my, that was a
Years
mess.
ago.
He, and we had some people here in town that weren't very well, they weren't doing the best thing for our town of Potsdam. And if that would have gone through, we would have had to, I think it was every day, stop and arrest 7 people to have enough income coming in to ever even start that thing working. It was the most ridiculous thing, and the clerk at that time, which I will not mention, sent letters to all the municipalities around trying to persuade them to be under our police protection
They had to
instead
match-
of their own.
They had to
so-
match $300,000
Yeah.
before they could accept the $300,000.
And it was they put Reverend Yoder in jail for a day because he was so against all this. He was our mayor at that time, and he was really our godsend that sent all that back. But do you know that that council got that grant over the phone? It was not even a written thing.
Well, we got the first 25,000, and Carl Yoder, our mayor, sent it back, and they sent me to jail.
Yeah.
Nice
So-
people.
So we do have some things that happened here in Potsdam that were,
Put Potsdam on the map.
Yeah, it sure
Nobody
did.
knew where Potsdam was till after
Yeah.
that, and then everyone
Yeah.
knew where
You can
Potsdam
come out
was.
cartoons in the Dayton paper.
right,
Yeah.
so,
It's been very, very, very interesting. Thank you all very much. We have learned a great deal about Potsdam. It's just been a very enjoyable time. Yes.
Mary mentioned about everybody being born here in Potsdam. A lady asked, a little boy asked a lady if she knew where he came from. She said, yeah, Stark brought you. And the little boy thought a little bit, and he said, well, Mom, where did you come from? She said, the Stark brought me. And the little boy thought a little, well, how about Grandma, where did she come from? She said, the Stark brought her. He thought a little bit, he said, Mom, we haven't had a natural birth in our family yet this year. So we had a natural birth.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for coming. Anybody have any comments? Well, we thank you very much, and we've enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on tape. All right? Thanks very much.
Thank you.